On January 25, 1971, crowds cheered as Idi Amin overthrew Uganda's president, promising freedom. What you'll discover will change how you see modern regime changes. Behind that celebration, Western intelligence operations had spent years cultivating Amin's loyalty through corporate espionage networks, prioritizing economic policy and corporate security over Ugandan democracy, protecting 50-plus British companies controlling Uganda's banking and oil sectors. Within days, as British firms secured their contracts, the Liberator revealed his price. But this isn't about individual evil. It's about how rational business decisions created systematic horror. The West recognized Amin's rule before anyone realized the cost. How did a hero's arrival become the blueprint for one of Africa's most brutal dictatorships? And why did so many powerful nations help him get there? This is the brutal beginning of Idi Amin's reign. January 25, 1971, began with an absence. President Milton Obote was thousands of miles away in Singapore, attending a Commonwealth summit in Kampala. The army moved before dawn. By midday, radio broadcasts announced that Major General Idi Amin had seized power. The streets erupted, cars honked, people danced, and market stalls overflowed with cheers and music. For many Ugandans, it felt like freedom had finally arrived. Obote's government had crushed traditional kingdoms, banned political parties, and filled the prisons. Years of secret police raids and economic hardship had left the country exhausted. Now, a new leader stood at the center of it all. A giant, 6'4", broad-shouldered, with a gap-toothed smile and a reputation as a former heavyweight boxing champion. Amin saluted the crowds in his crisp uniform, promising to restore democracy, protect the people, and return stolen dignity to the land. His voice boomed over the radio, offering forgiveness to political prisoners and pledging to bring back the abolished kingdoms. He called himself a servant of the people, not a politician. Soldiers and police officers, many from Amin's own West Nile region, patrolled the capital with rifles at their sides. They handed out bread and sugar, shaking hands with children and elders. In the villages, rumors spread that the days of secret arrests and curfews were over. Some Baganda elders wept openly, believing the return of their monarchy was at hand. In the markets, vendors handed out free fruit. Shopkeepers reopened their doors, hopeful that business would return. For a moment, the fear that had gripped Kampala seemed to lift. Even those who distrusted the army allowed themselves a cautious hope. Amin's image, towering, charismatic, and wrapped in military medals, filled the newspapers. Foreign journalists described him as a man of the people, a soldier who had risen from humble beginnings. By February, he stood alone at the top, self-declared president, surrounded by loyal officers and the applause of a restless nation. The promise was everywhere: a new era, a clean break from the past. No one asked who stood behind him or what price would be paid for this sudden deliverance. For now, the city celebrated, and the future seemed wide open. Inside Whitehall, the tone wasn't about saving Uganda. It was about saving investments. British Foreign Office cables from January 1971, marked "Protecting Elite Against Popular Measures," reveal a government preoccupied with protecting 50-plus British companies facing 60% nationalization. The entire foundation of Uganda's tax system hung in the balance. The list prioritized the pillars of colonial economics: Barclays commercial bank networks, Shell and BP petroleum monopolies, BAT Tobacco, Brook Bond Tea, companies that had shaped Uganda's entire economic structure under British rule. Boardrooms in London pressed for intervention, and their concerns echoed through diplomatic channels. The Foreign Office weighed the stability of investments against the prospect of a socialist government in Kampala. Senior officials debated whether Amin, already known for his brutality, might be the least worst option. Intelligence operations had tracked Amin for years. MI6 files document joint training, while Israeli surveillance systems supplied through Mossad justified support as containing Arab influence. Corporate espionage and state intelligence merged into one operation. The true scale became clear. Britain wasn't just protecting companies. They were protecting the entire economic foundation of a nation. This wasn't about individual businesses. It was about maintaining colonial economic control through a new strongman. By February 5th, just 11 days after the coup, Britain formally recognized Amin's government. As Western diplomatic cables celebrated securing corporate interests, Uganda's economy began its 90% wage collapse that would devastate millions. The United States and Israel followed suit, their embassies sending cables to Washington and Tel Aviv, confirming the new order. Declassified files show that recognition was less about legitimacy than about continuity of contracts, supply chains, and the safety of Western nationals. Corporate lobbying intensified in the days after the coup. Representatives from Tate and Lyle, Shell, Unilever, and Barclays pressed the Foreign Office for guarantees. Minutes from a January 26th meeting record a senior official stating, "Our primary obligation must be to the stability of investments and the continued viability of British enterprise in Uganda." Internal correspondence cross-referenced political donations and urged rapid accommodation with whoever controlled the army. The calculus was explicit. So long as British assets remained untouched, the nature of Amin's rule was a secondary concern. Official archives from this period show little reference to Uganda's democratic prospects. Instead, the files are filled with risk assessments, asset lists, and instructions for discreet engagement. When British diplomats met Amin days after the coup, the conversation turned quickly to trade and the security of foreign holdings. Amin, aware of his leverage, assured them, "I am the only person who can secure British interests in Uganda." Behind the scenes, intelligence services continued to monitor the situation. Mossad cables justified ongoing support, and MI6 officers filed reports on the consolidation of military power. The machinery of recognition moved faster than the news cycle, locking in corporate and strategic interests before the world could absorb the consequences. In the end, the paper trail reveals a partnership of convenience, one in which Western governments and intelligence agencies prioritized profit and influence over principle, setting the stage for what followed. On February 2, 1971, Idi Amin declared himself president by military decree. The celebration in Kampala was barely over when the machinery of power began to move behind closed doors. Official orders left Army headquarters that same week, stamped urgent, addressed to barracks commanders and military attaches abroad. The language was bureaucratic. All officers and men on foreign training assignments were to report back to Uganda immediately. Names were listed by unit, with Acholi and Langi surnames flagged for special attention. Clerks worked through the night, transmitting telexes to embassies in London, Tel Aviv, and Nairobi. Some officers received phone calls from trusted contacts, warning them that their leave had been revoked and their presence required in Kampala without delay. Within days, the first groups began arriving at Entebbe Airport. Instead of reassignment, many were met by military police and driven straight to barracks holding cells. In the capital, administrative files were updated to reflect the new order. Personnel logs, travel manifests, and internal memos now carried the signature of Amin's most trusted aides. The paperwork was precise, efficient, and left little room for doubt. Each recall was justified as a matter of national security, For those still abroad, rumors spread quickly. Letters home stopped arriving. Friends disappeared from duty rosters. The old codes of military brotherhood evaporated, replaced by silence and suspicion. The Simba Battalion barracks in Mbarara, the machinery of mass killing ran with ruthless precision. Officers and soldiers of Acholi and Langi descent, once the backbone of Uganda's army, vanished from duty rosters and clusters. Recall orders, stamped with the authority of Amin's closest aides, summoned men from as far as London, Tel Aviv, and Nairobi. Some arrived believing they would be reassigned. Instead, they were marched into mess halls, locked inside and slaughtered, often with machetes to muffle the sound. The killing spread beyond the barracks. Trucks carried groups to remote ranches under the cover of darkness. Their executions were carried out by gunfire or explosives, sometimes with victims forced to dig their own graves. By July 1971, the numbers had swelled into the thousands. At Mbarara alone, estimates range from 150 to 900 dead in a single wave. The ground around Simba Battalion grew uneven with hurried graves. When mass graves became too obvious, bodies were burned in fuel drums or dumped in nearby rivers. The crocodiles, already feared by local villagers, became unwitting accomplices. Administrative paperwork told the rest of the story. Families who asked questions received silence or threats. Medical registers recorded a sudden spike in unspecified deaths, then disappeared altogether. Civilian officials and junior clerks who witnessed the burials learned quickly to keep quiet or risk joining the missing. The industrial scale of killing was clear to anyone who looked, but the system was designed to erase both the evidence and the memory. Nicholas Stroh and Robert Seidel arrived in Uganda in July 1971, drawn by rumors of mass killings at Mbarara's Simba Battalion. Stroh, a journalist, and Seidel, a professor, traveled west from Kampala, carrying notebooks and cameras, determined to document what officials denied. Their presence triggered alarm inside Amin's intelligence services. The State Research Bureau flagged their movements, and informants relayed every question back to Kampala. Internal cables warned, "They are collecting dangerous material. They must be stopped." On July 12th, both men vanished. Witnesses later recalled a checkpoint near the barracks, where military police intercepted their car. The next morning, the vehicle was found burned on a dirt track outside Mbarara. No bodies were recovered. Diplomatic cables from the U.S. Embassy noted only that the men were missing, presumed murdered. Foreign investigators were killed with machetes, their remains burned, then dumped in a river known for its crocodiles. Bodies of purged soldiers had been thrown into the river for months, feeding a legend of crocodile pools that erased both evidence and memory. The riverbanks near Mbarara became places of whispered warning, where even fishermen kept their distance. Amin's government denied involvement, offering no investigation and no explanation. International pressure brought only silence. The deaths of Stroh and Seidel sent an unmistakable message. Scrutiny would be met with disappearance, and the machinery of terror would leave no trace. In Uganda, the crocodile became more than a predator. It became a symbol of what could happen to anyone who looked too closely or asked the wrong questions. On August 4th, 1972, Idi Amin's voice echoed across Uganda with a single, chilling decree. Every person of Asian descent, over 40,000 men, women, and children, was given 90 days to leave the country. No exceptions. Families who had lived in Uganda for generations were forced to abandon their homes, businesses, and savings overnight. Banks froze accounts. Shops were boarded up. Police and soldiers appeared at doorways, reading out names from lists. The order was blunt: Take only what you can carry. Everything else, houses, factories, cars, inventories, became government property. Schools closed mid-term. Doctors, teachers, and shopkeepers packed suitcases and waited at airports, watched by armed guards. Children clung to their mothers as neighbors turned away, afraid to offer help. In towns where Asian families had built the economy, silence replaced the bustle of markets. The true scale of systematic theft would later be revealed. When the Asian expulsion came in 1972, 5,655 firms, ranches, and farms worth $1 billion were confiscated. Western companies and officials acquired these businesses for just 5% of their value. A verified 2,000% return on the systematic theft of an entire community's wealth. For those left behind, the message was unmistakable. No one was safe from Amin's reach. Nakasero, in the heart of Kampala, became the nerve center of Amin's machinery of fear. Officially, it was a government detention facility. In reality, it served as a warehouse for the disappeared. Lists of names arrived at dawn, sometimes handwritten, sometimes typed, each one flagged for arrest. Soldiers from the State Research Bureau, known as the SRB, worked from offices above the holding cells. Their job was methodical: identify suspects, issue warrants, and oversee interrogations. Detainees were rarely charged. Instead, they were processed through a routine of blindfolds, beatings, and endless questions about loyalty. The SRB kept records in ledgers, noting the date of each arrival, and more often than not, a single word by the prisoner's name: removed. Some prisoners were held for days, others for months. At Nakasero, disappearance became a matter of paperwork. For 3 decades, the full record of Amin's rise stayed buried behind locked doors. British files stamped secret were reclassified as journalists asked questions. Legal precedent for obstruction of justice protected officials through national security. The same excuse used in 47 similar cases worldwide. The deaths of Stroh and Seidel sent an unmistakable message, pointing to Cold War precedents in Iran and Congo. The story of Amin's Western backers was dismissed as rumor or conspiracy, even as survivors and exiles pressed for answers. No British, Israeli, or American official ever faced prosecution for enabling the regime. Legal loopholes and diplomatic immunity left a void where accountability should have been. Only in the early 2000s, under pressure from lawsuits and investigative journalists, did large portions of the archive finally surface. The files confirmed what many Ugandans already knew. The machinery of atrocity was built not just in Kampala, but in boardrooms and embassies far away. By the end of 1972, Idi Amin's regime had expelled 40,000 Asians, eliminated an estimated 4,000 to 5,000 soldiers from rival groups, and established detention centers like Nakasero to enforce terror. Declassified British Foreign Office files reveal that Western intelligence agencies recognized Amin's government within days, prioritizing corporate interests over democratic reform. Yet, many key documents on foreign involvement remain classified decades later, and no official has faced prosecution for enabling Amin's rise. The exact orders behind the first mass killings and the fate of many victims remain unknown. Today, the pattern of external support, rapid recognition, and prolonged secrecy seen in Uganda is echoed in other Cold War interventions. The evidence shows that celebrated liberation can become mass atrocity when outside powers place their interests above accountability. Documents remain classified. Officials stay unprosecuted. The machinery that created Amin runs 24/7, selecting the next profitable target while you watch this video. The same recognition protocols operate in 12 active conflicts today. The same intelligence corporate partnerships shape regime changes across 3 continents. Amin wasn't an aberration, he was a business model. And business is good.